and enter into our first game of this best of 3.
It's an interesting combination here. We do get the Weather War immediately with Kyogre coming out. We'll activate the Drizzle, then immediately have it negated by the Drought from this Torkoal. And, Torkoal Lunala is not a lead combination I've seen a whole lot of, but I think it's kind of fun here. We just see the Flutter Mane, which is going to get the photosynthesis boost from that Drought. So the Weather War is not all good, but I think it's sort of a fun solution, right? I think a lot of the more defensive leads are really going to struggle with the taunt from Flutter Mane, and Lunala is probably not going to enjoy that either. But the offensive option is pretty interesting here, right? Maybe just have the Lunala try to attack the Flutter Mane, at least get a boosted fire type attack off with Torkoal, even if you may have to take a water type attack from Kyogre in return. And Nick's sort of in a weird spot, right? We're like, well, I'd love to switch out and get control of the weather again, but can I really afford to do that here?
And I think he's just going to give it up. He's already hovering over the option of keeping this Kyogre in, and despite the fact that he does not have that weather advantage, will just try to full send, hopefully a full HP Water Spout. Given the actual speed interactions of these Pokemon, this Kyogre will be the second to move on the field, and that's not something that this Torkoal is going to be taking super comfortably. You're also under the threat right now because this Flutter Mane is faster. You're either forcing the Terrestrialization out of this Lunala immediately, or it's going to be taking a huge Shadow Ball, breaking that Shadow Shield, and then the Kyogre can hopefully clean up from there. You see the Torkoal switch out, and Indeedee takes the field instead, and there's the Terra.
Yeah, it's a very interesting move here. We can see the Torkoal coming out immediately, switching out of battle despite having control of the weather, and this really interesting path. I don't know if I've really seen a team like this approach a matchup this way, and maybe catching Nick a little bit off guard.
Well, here's the Shadow Ball from the Flutter Mane that's going to go into this newly terrestrialized Lunala. You can see how that Shadow Shield is going to help out there, but the special defense drop is huge. This might be a big turn for at least getting some extra damage through, but it certainly does not help for later on in this game versus this Flutter Mane. That terrain, though, getting set up allows this Lunala to have that Expanding Force become that spread move, and it's a pretty good damage trade for Chih, all things considered.
I love this angle. You're looking at the team sheet. It's a hard Trick Room team, and there's no caster cam right now, so you have to imagine me air quoting hard Trick Room because that's really interesting, right? You see the Expanding Force, not even trying to go for the Trick Room. A taunt there would have been a huge mistake, and despite getting to double target Lunala, that Water Spout wasn't so strong, and now Kyogre's had a hard time using that for the rest of the battle, forced to switch out here, and this bad matchup's looking a little playable.
I don't mind this, though. I think Chih on that first turn, taking out the Torkoal, was anticipating that Nick would have preserved that Kyogre a little bit later, and maybe even was trying to anticipate the switch out on that turn 1. So now Nick gets away with a little bit of that Water Spout damage, is able to maintain that full HP on the Kyogre for a little bit later, and gets something else in return. The taunt onto this Indeedee will not be able to go for Follow Me on the subsequent turns, and this Lunala has the opportunity to go for the Meteor Beam, but that's something that even this Rillaboom is going to be taking a bit better. It's gonna be targeted into that Flutter Mane, though. One of the big problems of this matchup will be eliminated by the Meteor Beam.
So that's really interesting as this match plays out. So now no longer has to worry about that taunt for game 1. This Lunala has become even more threatening with that boosted special attack. The taunt of the Indeedee is pretty troublesome. You don't love to see that. The Indeedee does have one attacking move and alluring voice, but hey, it's GS Cup. You don't really want a Pokemon like that on the field just being forced to use attacks. But the early advantage there coming with that knockout, and this is probably, if I was Nick, I'd feel a little bit off balance here. I was kind of thinking going in, maybe it's more of a positional battle, but this more aggressive approach seems to be working really well in this matchup.
It really has, and you still have that Torkoal. So despite the fact that Nick is going to be bringing that Kyogre back in, and I misspoke earlier, did take that Expanding Force, so it is at half HP. That means you're going to be limited to the Origin Pulse if you want, or Hydro Pump. Either of those two moves to really be able to take advantage of the rain. Chih has the option to bring in the Torkoal.
Yeah, and we saw how well that the Lunala was able to take the Water Spout. Whatever water type attack we will see here will be weaker than that if Torkoal is able to come and reduce the damage again. And hey, that Grass Terra is looking pretty good against Rillaboom too. They potentially have to take a super effective U-turn, but I think you're fine if that's the worst you're taking. Much more likely we see a fake out here instead. And you're talking a lot about the weather control of this matchup with the fire versus water, but maybe it's the terrain control we should look at. Rillaboom is able to switch that, and there's just a ton of incentive now to get the taunted Indeedee Indeedee out of the battle, but it's Lunala getting out of here first, like, hey, I don't need the special attack boost that badly. I'm going to keep playing things a little bit unconventionally, maybe try to keep my opponent off guard.
Well, there still was also that special defense drop that the Lunala had taken, so that's another debuff that this Lunala is able to cleanse away by removing itself from the field. And in fact, it's a double switch here for Chih. You're going to get the Ice Rider Calyrex in next to the Torkoal, and this is where things are going to start to get quite risky. Both of these Pokemon having a fantastic matchup into the Kyogre in the Sun and this Rillaboom. And the Origin Pulse, oh, it's going to miss one of those targets. Critically, though, it hits the Torkoal, bringing it down so low.
Yeah, the Torkoal in this battle now is looking like it might only be a drought bot for what's left. Does get control of the weather here. It puts Nick in a sort of interesting situation where, hey, do you try to get rid of this Torkoal? Do you anticipate a switch maybe where, you're in a situation now you really don't want to end up in a late game or that Torkoal is able to come back in under a Trick Room. Could still potentially do a lot of damage. Eruption no longer looking too threatening, but again, very interesting where now the Indeedee also out of battle, so gonna have to worry about it coming in and maybe messing with Rillaboom by changing the terrain. And we see the importance of that first knockout, whether you really like to cycle these Pokemon now to get your own field effects, and as soon as you start losing Pokemon, it's really tough to maintain control of those field effects.
You could still go for the U-turn, and so at least that's going to be something that Nick can use to capitalize on still having that fourth Pokemon in the back. But Chih has been so lights out with going for these manual switches, making sure that he can continue to capitalize on the weather and terrain control, something he's going to get back now with this Indeedee coming in to get the Psychic Surge.
Yeah, so for now, Rillaboom's going to get out of battle here, so eventually we'll be able to reset that grassy terrain, and while Indeedee probably doesn't love catching that super effective U-turn on the switch, its job here is to support these two beefy, restricted Pokemon, and its friend Torkoal potentially as well. And hey, Calyrex is going to come in here and probably take an attack well, but giving a free turn to the opposing Calyrex is always a little scary.
Especially if that Calyrex is going to go for something like the Trick Room, but now we see the Kyogre just simply go for the Water Spout. There was a critical hit, but that Indeedee still hangs on, and there is no Trick Room. This Calyrex just decides to go for the Glacial Lance, brings this Kyogre down quite low.
Yeah, and that's critical here where not only is it such an important Pokemon, but Nick getting down to two Pokemon would potentially set up a situation where he loses these control of the terrain for the remainder of the battle. Rillaboom going to be able to switch in once more, so we will see the grassy terrain once again, but now he's going to have to worry about this endgame, right? Well, okay, so there's two different paths he could go, right? Where maybe Trick Room gets set up on the opposing side, Torkoal comes back in, and despite having that low HP, kind of makes a big play like we saw Ursaring make at low HP yesterday, picked up some knockouts. Or the flip side is still scary where, hey, maybe Indeedee switches out, and Lunala comes back in and starts firing off some more expanded forces. So Nick's have to play this carefully and would really love to get a knockout here to try to simplify this game a little bit.
Well, Water Spouted at least is 100% accurate. You know that you're going to be knocking out that Indeedee no matter what, despite your HP bar going a little low. But Indeedee says, I'm not going to go down without a fight. Here's the helping hand.
Yeah, Glacial Lance wouldn't have been enough before, but maybe just be trading KOs here.
Wow, look at how little damage that Water Spout is going to do, but at least you're able to get that Indeedee out of the way. You didn't want to bring the Rillaboom in, though, because you'll have to take a Glacial Lance on it, but the Leech Seed is going to miss. That was something that Nick was banking on, just to maybe even force out this Ice Rider Calyrex on the next turn, but the Kyogre goes down, and what a big turn here for Chih to get away with.
Oh, that's pretty scary here. That's really going to make the remainder of this game trickier. You'd really like to get that Leech Seed on there, start winning the battle between these two Calyrex. It was already kind of the complication for Nick, where the remaining Pokemon in his team not quite as effective in this matchup as the other ones. That Calyrex is going to be very critical for Nick. Certainly this Rillaboom going to have a hard time getting through the Grass-type Lunala later, and also has to worry about this Torkoal. So getting that extra HP on the Calyrex would have been helpful. We see the Grassy Surge go down here, allow the Rillaboom to maybe be a little bit scarier, but other than one more fake out, Rillaboom's kind of in a tricky spot.
Yeah, it kind of looks like checkmate. You've got the Wide Guard on the Lunala as well, and taking a look at the attack this Ice Rider Calyrex has, you're really banking on this Glacial Lance to be your major source of damage for the rest of this game. Terra here.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta use it eventually, I guess, but, that would cause his Glacial Lance to do more damage the other direction, which is really the threatening attack here, and I think the thing to avoid for Nick here is there any way you can avoid a couple turns here where you kind of have to get your Rillaboom knocked out by a Glacial Lance and then allow a Trick Room to be set up, which would probably let Torkoal come in and close this game out despite its low HP. Not a whole lot of time left. Nick's going to have to make a decision here. He knows this game is right on the edge of getting away from him.
Ooh, that was really close for comfort in terms of how fast Nick had locked in those moves. Chih decides to bring in the Torkoal one more time. It's a little bit awkward though when you think about it. The sun has been set for a couple of turns now. Looks like it might be expiring, and that's definitely something that the Torkoal would have loved to take advantage of. But because of the Pokemon that are left, there's not really a whole lot of need anymore to have that sun active.
Yeah, the Terastallization on Nick's side is good though. The Woodhammer going to come down here and do a bunch of damage to this Calyrex.
Yeah, that was a lot. I think even with a second Wood Hammer with the grassy terrain, that might be enough, especially after the chip of this Glacial Lance. But that Glacial Lance would have loved to be able to pick up the KO onto the Torkoal, and is unfortunately going to miss its mark. This Water Terastallization, though, on the Rillaboom is going to feel so nice. There were no critical hits either, so Nick knows, especially after this grassy terrain recovery, looks like it's going to take another 2 Glacial Lances to knock out these Pokemon.
Yeah, it's looking a little sketchy there for Nick, but I kind of like the way he's played this one now. The Torkoal's kind of pinned where it can't really do much. The grassy terrain now for Rillaboom going to keep it threatening this Calyrex, and it's a tough spot here. These Pokemon are likely going to be able to move if there's just attacking moves coming from the other side, and Lunala can't come in safely either, so it looks like it's going to be an attempt to sacrifice this Torkoal.
Yeah, because even if the Lunala comes in and you go for the wide guard, this Ice Ritter Calyrex is never going to get enough damage through for this Lunala to kind of catch up later. And so while it is just kind of a turn that you're going to play safe here from the Protect onto the Calyrex, this Torkoal comes down, the Lunala is forced to come in, and I think Nick is feeling it right now. The game win is in his sights. Despite the fact that you might have been worried about this Lunala in the end game, you preserved your Ice Ritter Calyrex, and it's trained so well to really do its job for Nick.
Yeah, it seems like you may have just had enough resources left, and now Lunala's going to come back into battle as that final Pokemon, but it's in a tough spot here where it needs to do a few too many different things. You know, has to stop the Glacial Lance with Wide Guard, but also it's the most realistic path to knocking out the opposing Calyrex with the Moongeist Beam, but also going to have to worry, no longer has that Power Herb or that special attack boost after switching out of battle, so, I feel like it might have needed just one more swing when it's going to get here.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if Lunala, is it trained in such a way that maybe it would be able to get the jump on either of these Pokemon, and so then it can help to support this Ice Ritter Calyrex? Can Chih get a double Protect? I think that would be one thing that could keep him into this game, especially because that final Wood Hammer from the Rillaboom would be enough to knock out the Ice Ritter Calyrex now.
Yeah, I think this is a really important turn where, either side could kind of take it here, but yeah, I think the double Protect, you hate going for it, but I think it might be necessary here, where it's just kind of hard to see a situation where there's just enough left to win without that happening.
Yeah, ooh, Calyrex on Nick's side is going to go for the Protect as well, also trying to bait out the fact that you do have that wide leg.
Oh, hits the double Protect.
Gets the double Protect, and that's such a big deal. Nick on this turn was banking to use this Wood Hammer to knock it out, and that means it looks like this Lunala is going to go for the gold, try to get this Rillaboom out of the way, and with the Meteor Beam, actually, is going to delay it a turn, but you get the special attack boost.
Oh, that's a little awkward, right? Where no longer has that Power Herb, so hold on, I'm going to Meteor Beam you, just wait a second. But, pays off there in the sense that, that Calyrex would have had the option of hitting a super effective Glacial Lance. Ends up being a nice play there by, to avoid or to, I guess, anticipate that not occurring. But they're just a little tenuous here, right? Neither side really made any progress there. I think very unlikely we see a triple Protect, so going to have to go for something different this time.
Well, are you sure? Because maybe you do have to bank on that, knowing the delicacy of this situation.
Yeah, I mean, it may be required, right? Where, hey, you get even less likely to succeed on that third Protect, but if you feel like, hey, I can't win at all if I don't hit it, it's still better than nothing. Really tough spot, and nice play by Nick to keep this going, right? Where we'll end up getting a situation that double Protect, at least so far, hasn't really mattered.
He's trying to go for it again, and maybe that's because he thinks this Lunala is going to try to go for the Meteor Beam into the Calyrex, but this Rillaboom is still a problem. Nick's double Protect is going to fail, and so is this, oh, no, not the Protect onto Chih Calyrex. So Wood Hammer does get the knockout there, but what is this Lunala capable of? We'll find out. Wood Hammer recoil is also going to make this a little bit tough, but as this Lunala lands the Meteor Beam into the Calyrex, it's just a one one-hit knockout. And Chih, wow, with the critical hit too. I wonder if that mattered.
Yeah, you'd assume Nick thought so, right? Because otherwise he wouldn't have gone for that double protect. Really wound up burning him to protect the previous turn. Usually it's so easy to play around the meteor beam after the power orb's gone because you don't have to worry about that. But really, we're going to go for the U-turn here, do a decent amount of damage. But now that this Lunala special attack's been boosted, this is going to do a lot of damage.
Yeah, even though this Rillaboom does have this assault fist, it's been taking the chip from those wood hammers turn after turn, and Chih pulls it out in this first game. That double protect so critical to allow this Lunala to go for that first setup turn of the meteor beam.
Looks like you just went through a battle there where that was a very stressful match, I think. A lot of twists and turns, that one.
It was stressful for me to watch this.
It felt like it for a while. They're like, all right, this is an incredible start with that switch to get the expanding force off. Seemed like such a big lead. And they did a really great job of getting himself back into it. I really do think it was that turn where both the Calyrex that protected that kind of switched it back the other way, where going for the no power or meteor beam. You don't see players even attempt it very much. There's just so many ways it can go wrong, but it was a really good read there, kind of anticipating his opponent would anticipate the double protect and open up that opportunity. Great job there to pick up that win, and hey, on Nick's side, you probably feel a little bad about it, where if that double protect doesn't happen, your Rillaboom picks up a knockout, and we're looking at a little different ending there, but still a lot of fun, and both players know that they can still win games in this set going into game 2.
But even if that double protect doesn't happen, think back to when Nick protected his own Calyrex and there was no wide guard on the Lunala. If you were able to hit that Glacial Lance, surely the Lunala goes down, right? Or it gets into that range where you're going to have that U-turn knock it out.
Yeah, definitely. If Nick had made a different read, you can avoid the double protect mattering and all. It doesn't happen there. Nick isn't able to quite make the right read. Almost had it anyway, where I think maybe one of those reads he's making, all right, if I get the read right, I win. If I get the read wrong, I still like my odds. Didn't wind up working out that time, but I think that was just a fascinating game 1 to start this set with in so many different ways. If I'm Nick, I was really expecting a different game plan from my opponent, and I think that makes this team preview really tricky. Now, as you know, on the brink of elimination, where this is the final round of Swiss, so these players must win this set to stay in the tournament, but also now Nick's down 0-1. He had a very kind of unconventional approach from his opponent there, and it makes team preview so tricky, where, will he try to play this matchup again similarly in game 2, or will maybe see some of the more defensive positioning-based battle we kind of expect from this sort of matchup?
But especially when Chih on paper does have the negative side of the matchup, you do expect Nick to win. This is such a huge blessing for Chih. Now you've got 2 chances, when you look at it from his perspective, to win.
Yeah, and I think that could be really big here, because what we saw in that previous game, there's a lot of really cool synergies on this team, and he only has to find it one more time over the course of 2 sets. Really seeing the value of this player's experience as well. The champion of the event in Taiwan showing us why, using the same team once again, and could be a team that's strong enough to give him the World Championships, as we see a familiar Pokemon starting the battle here.
We sure do. So we'll see this turn play out exactly like we did in that game number 1. The Kyogre sets the rain, Torkoal takes it away, and then Fluttermane gets a very nice accidental photosynthesis boost.
Yeah, I love this here where, again, this is a pretty aggressive lead by the Sun side of the field, right? Where Torkoal kind of exposed, Lunala kind of exposed. You don't really have an option of a really defensive setup here. You can try to go for a Trick Room. I think that would be a little scary, but maybe it works this time, right? After that really aggressive play the previous time, it kind of puts Nick on the back foot, like, oh, I don't want to take that huge expanding force again that made that matchup really tricky. So I'm excited to see how this plays out. I really think this is such an intricate matchup to try to play a best of 3 in. I do think taking that first game was just such a huge advantage mentally.
Absolutely. You could see actually Nick is really struggling for this first turn to kind of figure out what to do. Knowing how that turn 1 of game 1 played out, the Indeedee switched in, the Lunala went for this gigantic expanding force, and it already put that Kyogre quite low in HP for later on in the game. And as we see this game 2 play out, it's the Ice Rider Calyrex as a small adjustment here from Chih, which makes me think maybe it is a Trick Room angle.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't know if I could have clicked Taunt here if I was Nick, where it just seems like it's so risky if you get what you had in the previous game. But get the Terastallization once again, I think that just kind of makes sense given this matchup. Lunala can't afford to take too much damage from this Kyogre. It did do a decent amount of damage to Water Spout even in the Sun last time.
Well, the Moonblast helps to break this Shadow Shield again as the Kyogre follows that up with the Water Spout. But this Lunala is still so healthy, and Chih knows this Trick Room is so free, and you've got two fantastic Pokemon in the Trick Room to take advantage of it right away.
And what an incredible way to do this, right? Where we don't really see any of the support Pokemon, still gets the turn 1 Trick Room, doesn't really get any significant damage on his side of the field for it, has the weather control, and has both of his restricted on the field for all the turns of Trick Room. I don't know if I could quite have imagined this when we were looking at the matchup before the match started, but I'm just really impressed by this player. It's just such expert play on a team archetype that doesn't usually work at this level if you're playing in a really telegraphed way. This is some special gameplay that we're seeing.
But that's exactly what you called out the taunt on the Fluttermane, and I think this is the reason why. How easy is it for you to lock down any of the 3 Trick Room Pokemon on the team with that taunt specifically? And so if you're Nick, you just have to look at trying to stall out these turns of Trick Room. Oddly enough, Chih is taking this first one to just go for a Protect onto this Ice Rider Calyrex, but he is feeling it with this Moongeist Beam into the Fluttermane. You are going to be dealing massive amounts of damage, putting this Fluttermane down to its Focus Sash, but that means on the subsequent turns, Ice Rider Calyrex is faster. This Fluttermane does not have too much longer left in the second game.
Oh, and it attacks into the Protect, so Nick's not going to get anything out of that turn, and just like you said, that Fluttermane, Nick would almost have been better off if that was knocked out there. Now has a very quick 1 HP Pokemon in Trick Room, which makes it a very slow 1 HP Pokemon, and Calyrex like, ooh, that looks good. I feeling a little chilling nay coming up here, so tough spot for Nick, and you also, if you want to switch out of battle, try to avoid giving the attack boost, that's really risky too. It's really Kyogre you'd love to switch out here in order to try to get a position where you can get control of the weather again, and things are looking really bleak for Nick here. This matchup seems so good, but it's just such a strange way to play the matchup, so clever on his opponent's side, and Nick just hasn't been able to find any answers here.
I think either way, you have to give up the Fluttermane here. Everything that looks like it's in the back, you don't want to switch in your Ice Rider Calyrex to be able to take 2 attacks. And especially if you suspect that something like a Shadow Ball might be going that way too, or Moongeist Beam, not something that you want to deal with. So Nick, unfortunately, in the second game, has to give up this Chilling Neigh boost over to this Ice Rider Calyrex, and that's where things can start to get very spicy. Because as soon as Ice Rider Calyrex is off to the races, it really can't start to run away with things. And now the Meteor Beam from this Lunala too. Both of these Pokemon are huge threats.
It's like, yeah, I'd like a boost too, and after all that damage, Kyogre is almost going to get knocked out as well. Itself winding up as potential Glacial Lance bait. Hydro Pump's going to come in with that reduced damage from Drought. Really just not enough, and Calyrex is going to enter the battle here with an awful lot of work to do. One of its friends has already been knocked out. Its buddy Kyogre is pretty low in HP as well, and while normally a Calyrex entering the field during Trick Room is so exciting, neither of his Pokemon look quite ready to be knocked out. It just have to worry about a potential wide guard, and maybe if you're a Nick side, like, okay, well, I'm threatening this, I can try to reverse the Trick Room, but if you do that and just get double attacked, the game is going to end. So really important play for Nick here. Can you get away with this Glacial Lance? Can you get away with a Leech Seed? Is Trick Room going to be available? If Nick doesn't get this call right, it is over.
It looks so safe though for Chih to just go for the wide guard and Glacial Lance on his side, since you don't have wide guard from Nick to worry about. You know you're going to get the knockout onto the Kyogre, unless the Kyogre goes for the Protect. But this Calyrex still would not be able to get any damage through. And how much is the Leech Seed really going to add up for the rest of this game?
Yeah, we'll have to see. Kyogre is going to get the Protect here, decides that, hey, I don't want to be a Chilling Neigh boost yet.
Ooh, but with the Reposing Glacial Lance, we now see that there's no wide guard having been selected for this Lunala. Calyrex, as an Ice type, is going to take that Glacial Lance just a little bit better, especially because it's bulky, and does land the Leech Seed this time around onto Chih-Hung's own Calyrex Ice. Expanding Force 2, Chih-Hung did not get that call right. I think Nick gets 1 turn now, needs a couple more to get right in a row to get through this Trick Room successfully, but that's a good start.
Yeah, it's pretty big where, the Calyrex not likely to want to leave battle on the opposing side of the field, so this Leech Seed could really pay off. The Calyrex and Nick's side of the field going to end this turn almost at full HP, and now you're cooking a little bit, right? And you still have to worry about, I think why his opponent played the turn the way he did is like, well, okay, that's unfortunate, but I still have a turn here where I'm threatening a knockout in that slot, so Kyogre, you're going to switch out, or I'm going to pick that knockout out, and still feeling pretty good. We see the final Pokemon is Rillaboom here. Also not a Pokemon who looks super excited about the idea of taking a boosted Glacial Lance, and once Trick Room expires, things get a little bit scary here. Kyogre would love Trick Room to expire. The Calyrex would not, facing down that boosted Lunala and losing its speed advantage potentially, so still a tough spot for Nick.
It is, and I think that's where you have to look at this next critical turn here from Chih to actually now, as we see here, preserve the Lunala. After getting that Meteor Beam boost, it feels bad again, but Chih said it's okay in that first game, and it worked out beautifully for him. And now you've got your Torkoal back onto the field to hopefully get through these next couple of turns, and you are also going to be able to take this Ice Rider Calyrex just a little bit better. But we see Chih is able to go first. You've got this attack boost onto this Ice Rider Calyrex. It's just a one-hit knockout onto the Rillaboom. And so now Nick is stuck with just his Kyogre next to the Ice Rider Calyrex, but at least you get weather control for 2 turns.
Yeah, it's like Kyogre's going to be able to come back in. I'm not going to say for free, but first this Glacial has to come down. The damage does matter. You're going to see the Leech Seed attack this Calyrex at the end of the turn as well, and the HP is going to start adding up here. Not a whole lot of health left for this Calyrex. Will heal a little bit before the Leech Seed comes in with the Grassy Terrain, and after about 47 different end-of-turn effects, the Calyrex at Nick's side is going to be very healthy, but its teammates will not. Kyogre going to switch back in eventually with its low HP, and while Trick Room is going to expire and the Drizzle is going to be set for Nick, he had to pay just an incredible amount of resources to get through this Trick Room. Really only got the Leech Seed on the opposing Calyrex and a bit of damage, more than a bit of damage on the Calyrex, in exchange for his Rillaboom, his Flutter Mane, and almost all of his Kyogre's HP.
This is a tough turn, though, and Nick is going to have to hope this Origin Impulse lands onto both targets. From here, the Ice Rider Calyrex is surely going to pick up the final bit of HP on Chih, but Kyogre is on its last couple of legs for the rest of this game, too, and Nick needs this Origin Pulse to land.
Yeah, I mean, it would pick up both knockouts if it happened. However, on the other side of the field, I could give up those 2 KOs if I think my 2 back Pokemon beat these 2 Pokemon. But since Nick can't switch anymore, you have a lot of freedom on the other side of the field, right? Okay, well, I can pick what 2 Pokemon wind up on the field at the end of his turn. Maybe I sacrifice one of these Pokemon, I need the other for the end game. We do see a switch here. He's like, all right, I need Torkoal. I'm going to get control of the weather. My path through the game is a little bit different than just allowing these 2 sacrifices.
And the Ndidi now gets revealed as Chih-Hung's 4th and final. Same Pokemon then that we saw in that first game, just in a bit of a different order. And this Calyrex Ice going for the Protect does make things just a little bit trickier, as we see it's able to hang on for a little bit longer. Next turn, though, if it gets knocked out, maybe we see this Ndidi be able to go for the Trick Room. And it just has to get sacrificed here. Absolutely. The Origin Pulse connects, and with this Glacial Lance to follow it up, now Nick actually kind of comfortably back in this. Full HP Calyrex almost, and you have a boost of your own.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hate that if you're Nick, right? But you get the knockout, the Pokemon count is getting similar. What's scary is that, his opponent chose that, right? That was the most likely outcome of his action, so it's probably what he expected to occur there. The only other thing that really could have happened was a Trick Room. The Calyrex still almost going to get knocked out here, so it looks like it only has a single turn left if nothing changes, but the assumption then is like, okay, well, I thought that Nick would do that. I thought that giving up this Pokemon is the right move, and now this is the combination of Pokemon that I need. The Lunala coming out here can't protect, so the assumption here is like, all right, this is the decisive turn. This is the 2 Pokemon. My Calyrex either going down or switching, which seems unlikely here because the likelihood that winds up being a little scary for the Torkoal, so we'll have to see what these trainers have in mind.
And you can bring in the Torkoal, I guess, to get rid of the rain, but then even still, this Kyogre with this Mystic Water has still been pushing a ton of damage through that weather control. But the problem with this Lunala, then do you feel forced to actually have to go for the wide guard to block this Ice Rider Calyrex damage? Chih-Hung in that first game was able to get some pretty ballsy turns right, but this is going to have to go correct as well.
Yeah, keep in mind, 2 of Kyogre's attacks are spread moves as well, so do you anticipate a wide guard, the Hydro Pump in? A lot of really interesting options as the Terastallization comes down.
Terra Fairy is going to be the Terastallization of choice for Nick as we see the rest of this turn play out. Kyogre first to protect, and Chih-Hung may be able to weave something in here like a Trick Room, but the Lunala just tries to go for the Expanding Force, and this is the KO onto the Kyogre, and is able to do a significant chunk to this Calyrex, but of course you were probably hoping to get a little bit more. And now with the Ice-type Glacial Lance, Terra Grass Lunala is down for the count, and Nick gets away with 2 boosts now. now to this Calyrex Ice Rider with only that Torkoal left. It's a looking grim.
Hey, you know, the type trait doesn't matter too much when you have that much boosted attack. And, you know, Torkoal's going to come in and theoretically have some advantage. You know, it's going to have its drought up against Kyogre. It's going to, you know, be healthy or something. But, yeah, you can't. It looks so bad for Nick, right? He was really behind there, but was able to battle back in this one. Kyogre staying in the field's a big deal, too. Well, continues to add complication for this Torkoal. And, hey, you know, maybe the wrong Pokemon was preserved after all.
Now, Glacial Lance is going to be resisted by this Torkoal, but because of how the 3 boosts now that this Ice Rider Calyrex has gotten, you're so right. Sometimes it doesn't matter. It just matters that you've got a ton of damage. I'm not going to do the math there. But this, I mean, this Kyogre, does it just finish it off before the Ice Rider can? And it, I mean, there you go. Origin Pulse in the rain is also going to be single target into a super effective Torkoal. So that is going to be Nick Navarre tying up this series. We've got 1 game apiece, and it all comes down to this 3rd game to see who will move forward to this World Championship top cut.
Man, what a fun set this has been so far. Nick had a tough start to that game, really had to give up a lot in Trick Room, but not too much, right? And I think that's kind of just this format. You know, the Pokemon in this format deal so much damage, and again, there's been such clever use of the Trick Room on this team that they're going to have to take some damage, but able to keep Calyrex healthy and just really dominated that game. And if we think back to game 1, hey, you know, maybe if the Leech Seeds hits, we see something more similar to what we saw in game 2. So both trainers maybe back to the drawing board here, but I'm feeling pretty good if I'm Nick. As much as it was like maybe a little bit sketchy where he had to make some reads, that he saw the same thing as game 1, was able to beat it this time, I think probably gives him some confidence going to the decisive game of the set.
Yeah, but maybe this time around, does Chih then just decide to go for, if you go for the Trick Room again, does Nick then say, okay, I'll just taunt you this time around? It's a really tough call when you've seen these 2 games already play out in such a different fashion. That lead as well as that first turn is so critical.
Yeah, and I think to kind of go back to, we mentioned in team preview too, I do still feel like all things equal, Nick's team kind of has the advantage there. And I think that's some of why that was able to swing back, where it really is important for the Sun team to keep the advantage of the field, because, you know, once that starts slipping away, it's really tricky. And yet with both weather and the terrain sort of being necessary, there's a lot of switching you have to do to be ready to attack, and not a whole lot of attacking, which I think is some of how Nick was able to get through that. I'm still shocked though, where that, it just seemed like such incredible positioning turn 2 of game 2, where both restricted Pokemon are out there ready to fire away. We see a great read on the first turn of the Trick Room as well. It just seems so decisive, but Nick was still able to battle it back. I mean, that's just so scary, where, you know, I think I would be very tempted to change things up on the other side of the field despite the game 1 win, just because like it felt like RNG aside, that was about as good as it could go.
But I kind of wonder maybe if Chih can change things up just a little bit, where that Torkoal is doing more. You already called this out in game number 1. It was primarily there just to make sure that it had control of the weather away from the Kyogre, but it's got to do more than that. This thing has Terra Fire. It's got choice specs. How much damage it's able to do with Eruption and Weather Ball is just so immense when you've got all those additional modifiers on top of it. Plus this thing has Solar Beam. In the sun, full send it at the Kyogre.
Yeah, we haven't seen it attack at all, right? And, you know, this team's a little tricky there. We've got 3 Pokemon that can't use Protect and 2 Pokemon that can't attack. So, you know, they're kind of all one direction or another. But despite everything we've seen in the first 2 games, these trainers are both like, hey, I like what I've done in the previous games. I think that these same lead combination is going to send me to the top cut of this World Championships.
It's gonna have to be make or break for either Chih or Nick. They can see that final hurdle in sight. But once again, as we saw in games 1 and 2, it's gonna be the same leads, preview, and preliminary turn.
Yeah, it's such a tricky turn for Nick here as well. We kind of saw both ways this can play out for him, neither of which are actually that great, where the Shadow Shield for this Lunala is so irritating, right? Where you'd love to just taunt it to kind of limit its options, but if you do that, then your Kyogre's barely going to be able to do anything between Drought and a potential Terrestrialization again. But it still worked out last game for Nick, right? Where you kind of got like the worst case scenario and it was still okay, so do you make the same move again? Or do you think, hey, you know, I don't know if I can survive giving that much up? Nick doing a great job of taking all his time, thinking this through. This is a choice with a lot of consequences, so we'll have to see what the trainers choose to do here.
Yeah, really big, risky call, because if Chih decides to go all out onto the attack, this could backfire in a major way. But with the Torkoal taking its leave, we will see it replaced with the Urshifu. What a big change up here for the second game, but the taunt into the Lunala, and there's also no Terra Water Spout now going through with full HP. This Urshifu has to take over 50% of its health with the move in, and Lunala gets its Trick Room completely shut out.
Yeah, things looking great for Nick there, and it was a great read. Chiu probably thinking, oh, I didn't trick him the first 2 games. Surely I can get away with it in game 3, but not so fast. Nick calls the taunt. Urshifu going to switch in. That is the single strike Urshifu, not the rapid strike Urshifu that we know and love. This Urshifu really prefers to be under trick room, going to have a hard time with that Fluttermane who has that huge type advantage. The Kyogre has a speed advantage, and suddenly Nick's looking really good after seeming so doomed at the beginning of game 2.
I mean, this is what we should expect out of such an experienced player like Nick Navarre. He's been playing VGC for almost over a decade. Not only a 2-time regional champion, but also having multiple top cut performances in these huge international competitions. And he's able to get that call right in these game 3s. You know he's been here before. The work's not cut out just yet, as Nick is going to be moving into this next turn with a Rillaboom switch in. And this Fluttermane has full control right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Fluttermane kind of just got knocked out quickly the previous game. This time it's out for revenge. It's the quickest Pokemon on the field, no longer has to worry about any potential Trick Room shenanigans. Lunala forced to Terrastalize, even though it's in a pretty awkward spot here without weather control and facing these Pokemon down. Sucker Punch going to fail with another clever switch, and Nick's made yet another read.
And the Moonblast here will finish off that Urshifu for good for this 3rd game. Already, Chih goes down 1 Pokemon. And I think he knows it's gonna be a tough uphill battle from here. Maybe you're able to weave in just a bit more damage with the Meteor Beam from the Lunala as you get this special attack boost and the Power Urge to be able to make it go quickly. That unfortunately has to hit into the Rillaboom, and the Assault Vest and the Typing allows it to hang on with so much more HP.
Yeah, and this is the first time we've seen Nick take a Pokemon advantage other than a 2-0 and 2-1 at the end of the previous game. The field effects, even when he was at the Pokemon disadvantage, kind of slowly trended toward his favor because of natural type advantages. I think having the Pokemon advantage is even more devastating here. Calyrex going to come out. It could also potentially use a Trick Room here, but Fluttermane able to use a Taunt if it's needed, and Nick's got a pretty great positioning here, making Urshifu look a little Urshifoolish that previous turn, and he could be right about to send himself to the top cut.
I mean, it's tough here too, because this Ice Rider Calyrex, not only can it not Terrastalize, but you're staring down a Fluttermane that's able to hit you with a Shadow Ball. This Rillaboom, we've seen how much it can do on top of grass terrain with the Wood Hammers. That might just be enough for a knockout.
Yeah, I mean, either of these Pokemon could be in a lot of danger here, and that Terrastalization's already been committed. In the previous games, the grass Terrastalization for Lunala has been so impactful, but this game it hasn't done anything, and it makes this turn a lot easier to play for Nick because he knows there's no Terrastalization to worry about.
And you can just go for the fake out onto the Ice Rider Calyrex and go for that extra offensive game plan on the next turn. The Moongeist Beam will help out a little bit to make sure that this Fluttermane is a bit easier to manage, but you still have the speed control. Because that fake out was onto that Ice Rider Calyrex, you cannot set up Trick Room this turn.
Yeah, and now it's sort of a tricky spot. Previously in this set, that 1 HP Fluttermane has looked like fast food for the Calyrex, but this time it's going to be a pretty expensive meal with it being the quickest Pokemon in the field. If you want to pick that knockout up, you have to take a lot of risk where attacks between these two Pokemon could likely pick up the knockout in the Calyrex. The great thing, though, is that the taunt has just worn off. So now potentially either of these Pokemon use Trick Room. All of the options are available for both trainers, but Nick is still right on the precipice again. But he was right on the precipice of losing before, and it was able to be turned around. So we'll have to see if his opponent can do the same thing.
Still not over yet, especially if you are managed to get that Trick Room set up on either of these Pokemon. Torkoal can come in and at least deal a little bit of damage while the Kyogre is still waiting in the back. But that is the tricky thing. This Kyogre is still quite healthy and waiting in the back. It's really, really tough from here as this Fluttermane is going to commit its Terra.
Yeah, I wonder if you're trying to see maybe a Moonblast and a U-turn could pick up the knockout in this Lunala, which maybe sets up a world where the Kyogre could finish the game off.
Well, the Moonblast into the Lunala first, and it is going to take it down quite low. The special attack drop will eliminate the Meteor Beam special attack increase that it got, and that U-turn does the job. Chih in this third game is down to his final 2 Pokemon. This Ice Rider Calyrex, if it's able to set up this Trick Room, then might be a little bit better off. But you've got this Rillaboom that can come back in at any moment and make sure that you've got a bit more control.
For now, it's going to be the Calyrex at Nick's side of the field entering the battlefield once again. Can take any attacks here pretty well and kind of just be a nice pivot here without sending Kyogre back out and changing the weather before Torkoal comes back in.
In the Glacial Lands, I think Chih would have loved to be able to pick off that Rillaboom on the other side, but you will settle for a low HP Flutter Mane and getting the Terastallization out of Nick's arsenal for the rest of the game.
Yeah, at least get some resources, and that Chilling Neigh will give an attack boost. And we saw how big of a difference that can make even in a troublesome game in Game 2 for the Calyrex at Nick's side of the field, but things are a little bit bleaker here. No Trick Room setup this time. Torkoal going to need to enter the battlefield as the final Pokemon on his side of the field. Rillaboom is going to come out for Nick here, enabling him to switch out into Kyogre whenever he wants to and get the weather control for the remainder of this battle.
That is tough though, because you are in a spot where you have a couple of decisions you can make. If you're the Rillaboom, do you go for the fake out onto this Ice Rider Calyrex? Are you actually okay with switching in this Kyogre in order to take an attack from the Torkoal? And you have the choice specs. I mean, that is a good thing for Nick to know, is that this Torkoal has to lock into something for the rest of this game.
Yeah, that's true, where Eruption is pretty scary here, where normally you'd love to use it, but even if you get one big Eruption off, then what, right? Where there's no way you're ending this turn with speed control, because I think that the fake out is almost certainly going to come down to the Calyrex. I think it's a pretty telegraphed play. And yeah, I think the fake out onto the Calyrex and switching to the Kyogre is really tough to deal with. The Torkoal can't protect next turn, so if Kyogre doesn't miss one of its spread moves, it's just going to knock the Torkoal out, and this Calyrex is going to be isolated against 3 Pokemon, potentially one of which can Leech Seed it.
And as the Kyogre comes in, it sets the rain and sets the pace for the rest of this third game. Chih is going to play it a little bit safe too, with this Ice Rider Calyrex deciding to go for the Protect, so Rillaboom isn't quite able to land the mark, but Torkoal has to lock into something, and it is going to be the Weather Ball. So that's...
They're not quite able to knock out its own protecting Calyrex.
Yeah.
Maybe we're having a little fun here, given that this game has kind of gotten out of hand, and kind of regardless of what happened there, maybe wanting to deliberately not knock the Rillaboom out and provide his free switch there. Regardless, though, I think Nick really likes his positioning here, where not really any way to avoid a Water Spout knock on the Torkoal. This Wood Hammer is going to come down, and at the end of his turn, I think Nick will have an insurmountable advantage.
Yeah, Chih is already getting ready to shake Nick's hand after the Water Spout is able to secure the final 2 knockouts.